A businessman at the peak of success faces the unexpected. A child, a secret, and a woman he never stopped loving. Will he be able to reclaim what he lost? Before we begin the story, comment below what the country you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone! The city shimmered under the early evening lights, a kaleidoscope of neon and glass. Cars hummed along the avenues, and pedestrians rushed by, their faces buried in phones or deep in conversation. John Hale stepped out of his sleek black car, adjusted his tailored suit, and glanced at the high-rise headquarters of Hale Enterprises. The building stood as a monument to everything he had built: ruthless ambition, unyielding focus, and an empire worth billions. He inhaled deeply. It was just another day of acquisitions and negotiations. As he strode down the sidewalk towards the entrance, a small tug at his sleeve startled him. He stopped abruptly and looked down, seeing a boy, thin, with wide brown eyes that spoke of weariness far beyond his 7 years. The boy held up a crumpled pamphlet with shaking hands. His clothes were worn and too large, and his face was smudged with city grime. "Please, sir, will you take one?" The boy's voice was small, almost drowned out by the city noise. John hesitated. He wasn't used to interruptions, especially not from street children. But there was something in the boy's eyes that made him feel a pang of sympathy. Sighing, he took the flyer. John was momentarily stunned when he noticed a birthmark on the boy's hand. As soon as he handed over the flyer, the boy quickly blended into the crowd and disappeared. John barely noticed the words printed on the leaflet, something about a local shelter needing donations. But what caught his attention was the faint birthmark on the boy's wrist, unmistakable, a crescent shape exactly like the one he had carried since birth. His fingers grew icy cold, and the noisy sounds of the city seemed to fade, leaving only a distant silence. This couldn't be possible. 7 years ago, there had been someone who had broken through his carefully constructed world, Grace. He hadn't said her name aloud in years, but now it echoed like a forgotten melody. She had been everything he wasn't: gentle, warm, and humble. They had met when he was still clawing his way to the top, back when love had seemed like something he could afford. But it hadn't lasted. His mother, Diana Hale, the indomitable matriarch of the Hale dynasty, had ensured that. He hadn't known the details, only that Grace had left, disappearing from his life without a trace. His mother had told him it was for the best, that she was beneath him, a distraction. He had believed her, or at least convinced himself to believe. Now his mind reeled. Was it possible? Could this boy? He turned abruptly, his gaze sweeping the street. He shoved the pamphlet into his pocket and rushed into the building, his heart hammering. The sterile interior of the office did little to calm his nerves. John paced, replaying the encounter, his thoughts tangled. The birthmark was too distinct to be a coincidence. And the timing? The boy was 7 years old. 7 years since Grace had vanished. Could his mother have lied to him? Could there be a child, his child, out there? He clenched his fist. He needed answers. John grabbed his phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. He considered calling his mother, demanding the truth, but a deeper fear held him back. He needed proof before confronting her. If she had kept something this monumental from him, he wasn't sure he could ever forgive her. Instead, he dialed another number. "Marcus," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I need you to find someone. A woman named Grace Bennett. She might have a child. Start with local shelters and community centers. And do it discreetly." His assistant didn't ask any questions. "Understood, sir." As he hung up, John's eyes fell on the cityscape beyond the glass. The world he had built suddenly felt fragile, a house of cards trembling in the breeze. Days passed. Each morning, he walked to the same path, hoping to see the boy again. He scoured the streets, his mind a whirlwind of memories and regrets. How had he let Grace slip away so easily? Why hadn't he fought for her? On the 5th evening, as he exited the building, he saw him. The boy stood on the corner, gripping a bundle of leaflets. His eyes darted around, weary and cautious. John's breath caught. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten him. "Hey," he said softly. The boy looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. He didn't run. "What's your name?" John asked. The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Jamie?" John's heart twisted. Jamie, do you know your mom's name? The boy nodded. Grace? The name was a knife, cutting through the last shreds of doubt. John swallowed hard. Where is she? Jamie, can you take me to her? Jamie's eyes filled with something beyond fear and hope. He glanced around, then nodded. Come with me. They walked together through winding streets, the skyscrapers giving way to older, worn-down buildings. Each step felt heavier than the last. When they finally stopped in front of a small, dimly lit building, John's pulse thundered in his ears. Jamie led him inside. The room was modest, a mix of warmth and struggle etched into every corner. And then he saw her. Grace turned from the kitchen counter, her eyes widening in shock. The years had changed her, but she was still Grace, the woman he had once loved beyond reason. Her gaze darted between John and Jamie, tears welling up. John? She whispered, her voice trembling. He stepped forward, his eyes burning. Grace, why didn't you tell me? Before she could answer, the door creaked open behind them, and there stood his mother, her expressions as cold and unyielding as ever. John's mother, Diana Hale, stood in the doorway, her eyes cold and calculating as always. She took in the scene before her, her powerful son standing beside a street kid in Grace, the woman she had spent years erasing from his life. Her lips curled into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I should have known you'd find your way back here, Diana said, her voice dripping with disdain. John's jaw clenched, the rage simmering beneath his polished exterior threatening to boil over. What are you doing here, mother? Diana's eyes flicked to Jamie, her expressions hardening. Cleaning up a mess that never should have existed. Grace's face went pale. She stepped protectively in front of Jamie, her trembling fingers resting on his thin shoulders. He's not a mess, she whispered. John took a step forward, his gaze fixed on his mother. You lied to me. You made her disappear. And you knew about Jamie all this time, didn't you? Diana's eyes narrowed. I did what needed to be done, John. At the time, you needed to focus on your career. She would have dragged you down, and that child. She emphasized the word as if it left a bitter taste in her mouth, was nothing more than another obstacle. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. You threatened me. You told me if I ever contacted John again, you'd ruin my life and his. I didn't have a choice. John's heart twisted painfully. He turned to Grace, guilt crashing over him like a tidal wave. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Grace's shoulders sagged, the weight of 7 years of struggle evident in every line of her body. I didn't want to destroy you. Your mother made it clear that if I stayed, your entire empire would crumble. She said you'd lose everything. John's breath caught. He realized then that everything he'd built, everything he had sacrificed for, was standing on a foundation of lies, and he had let it happen. Jamie clung to Grace, his eyes wide and fearful. John knelt, his voice softening. Jamie, I'm your father. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. The boy blinked, tears welling in his eyes. You're my dad? John nodded, his throat tight. Yes, and I promise, I'm here now. I won't let you go. Diana's voice sliced through the moment like a blade. You're making a mistake, John. You're throwing your future away for them. He stood slowly, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time, he saw his mother not as a guiding force, but as a manipulator who had stolen years of his life. No, he said firmly. The mistake was ever believing you cared about anything other than power. Diana's eyes flashed with anger. You'll regret this. Leave, he said quietly. You've done enough damage. Diana's jaw tightened, but she turned on her heel and walked away, the echo of her footsteps fading into the night. The door clicked shut, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. John turned to Grace and Jamie, 1,000 emotions fighting for space in his heart. I don't know how to make this right, he admitted, but I want to try. Grace's eyes searched his face, uncertainty mingled with hope. I don't need you to fix everything, John. I just need you to be here. Jamie's small voice broke the silence. Can't we be a family? John's chest ached. He reached out, pulling them both into a tentative embrace. We'll figure it out. Together. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. A glimmer of hope. The warmth of that fragile embrace lingered far longer than the moment itself. But reality, cold and relentless, waited just beyond the door. John knew that reconnecting with Grace and Jamie was only the beginning. The threads of his carefully controlled life were unraveling, and what lay ahead would be anything but simple. They sat together in a small living room in Grace's apartment. It was cozy yet warm, with signs of struggle, scuffed floors, thrift stores furniture, and faded curtains that barely shielded them from the city's glow. Jamie nestled next to his mother, peering curiously at John, as if he was still trying to decide whether he was real. John's gaze softened. "Jamie, what do you like to do?" he asked, trying to bridge the chasm of 7 lost years. Jamie shrugged. "I like drawing and reading about spaceships." John smiled faintly. "Spaceships, huh? You know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut." Grace's eyes flickered with the ghost of a smile. "I remember." The shared memory tugged at something deep within him. He clenched his fist, fighting the guilt gnawing at his edges. He had missed everything. Jamie's first words, his first steps, his entire childhood so far. And Grace? She had faced it all alone. "I want to fix this," John said softly. "I want to take care of you both." Grace's expression tightened. "You can't just swoop in and fix everything, John. Life doesn't work that way. Jamie doesn't even know you yet." "I know that," he admitted. "But I want to try. I want to be here for both of you." Jamie looked at him, his eyes uncertain. "Will you come to my school tomorrow? There's a parent day, but I usually don't have anyone to go with me." The quiet vulnerability in his voice shattered John's heart. "Of course, I'll be there," he replied. Grace hesitated, doubt and hope wearing on her face. "John, are you sure you don't have to—" "I want to," he interrupted, his tone resolute. "I've missed too much already." The next morning, John found himself standing outside a warm brick building, Westwood Community School. Children swarmed the entrance, their laughter filling the air. John adjusted his cufflinks, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored suit. He spotted Grace and Jamie waiting near the steps. Grace had dressed in her best, a simple blouse and skirt that couldn't quite hide the wear and tear of years gone by. Jamie clutched her hand, his eyes lighting up when he saw John. "You came!" John exclaimed, his smile breaking through the clouds of hesitation. John smiled back. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." They walked inside together, past peeling paint and faded bulletin boards covered with crayon drawings. John felt the curious stares of other parents and teachers. He was used to being the center of attention, but here it felt different, more personal, more raw. Jamie led them to his classroom, where a cheerful teacher with graying hair greeted them. "Jamie, I see you brought someone today," the teacher said warmly. Jamie beamed. "This is my dad." The words were simple, but they hit John like a freight train. "My dad." He swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "It's nice to meet you," the teacher said with a kind smile. "Jamie's a wonderful student." John's heart swelled with pride. He glanced at Grace, who offered him a tentative smile. Maybe, just maybe, they could piece this broken puzzle back together. The day passed in a blur of paper crafts, reading circles, and hesitant smiles. John marveled at Jamie's world, so small yet so vibrant. He watched his son interact with other children and saw the way he lit up when he talked about spaceships and dinosaurs. It was a world John had never known, and it both enchanted and terrified him. But as the afternoon sun began to dip, reality crawled its way back in. John's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was Marcus. He stepped outside, his jaws tightening. "What is it?" he asked. "There's something you need to know," Marcus said, his voice low. "Your mother, she's not done. She's been making calls. There's a custody case being filed against Grace. They're claiming she's unfit to care for Jamie." John's blood ran cold. "On what grounds?" "She's using everything. Grace's income, the neighborhood she lives in, even Jamie's absence from certain medical records. Your mother's building a case that Jamie would be better off, well, you, without Grace." John's hands shook. She wouldn't dare. She already has, Mark said grimly. I thought you should know. It'll hit the courts next week. John's mind spun. This was his mother's final play. Tear Jamie away from Grace, to destroy the family he was just beginning to reclaim. He ended the call and leaned against the wall, the weight of the world pressing down on him. When he returned to the classroom, Grace immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? She asked quietly. He hesitated, the truth a bitter taste on his tongue. My mother. She's trying to take Jamie away from you. Grace's face went white, her hands trembling. She can't do that. John swallowed hard. She can. And she's already started. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't lose him, John. He's my world. You won't, John promised, a voice fierce. I won't let that happen. But even as he said the words, fear gnawed at the edges of his resolve. His mother's power was vast, her influence stretching into places most people couldn't even see. Fighting her would be like fighting a shadow, elusive, relentless, and everywhere. Jamie looked between them, sensing the tension. Are you mad at each other? He whispered. John knelt, his hands resting on Jamie's small shoulders. No, buddy, we're not mad. We're just figuring things out. But everything's going to be okay. Grace wiped her tears, a steely determination settling in her eyes. We have to fight this, no matter what it takes. John nodded. We will. But deep down, a seed of doubt took root. Could they really win against a woman who had already stolen so much from them? And if they couldn't, what would happen to Jamie? The shadows of the past were closing in, and the future had never felt more uncertain. The days leading up to the custody hearing were a blur of tension and preparation. John's apartment, usually a sanctuary of pristine order, now resembled a war room. Legal documents and notes littered the polished mahogany desk, and the constant buzz of phone calls filled the air. Grace sat at the kitchen table, her fingers curled around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Jamie was at a friend's house, blissfully unaware of the storm about to crash through his world. John stood by the window, his silhouette rigid against the city skyline. He turned to Grace, his voice strained. Our lawyers are confident, but it's going to be close. My mother has an influence in places I didn't even know existed. Grace nodded, her expression weary but determined. We have to try. Jamie deserves better than this, better than being a pawn in her game. John walked over, placing his hand gently on her shoulders. I'm so sorry it's come to this. You shouldn't have to fight for your own son. She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to shed. We both made choices, John. Now we fix them together. A knock at the door shattered the fragile silence. John's jaw tightened. He opened it to find Marcus, his face grim. There's been a development, Marcus said, glancing at Grace. It's not good. Just tell us, John demanded. Marcus hesitated. Your mother has new evidence. She's claiming Grace was involved in an incident of neglect when Jamie was an infant. It's fabricated, but it's convincing enough to sway the judge. Grace's face went pale. That's a lie. I've never neglected Jamie. John's fist clenched. She's desperate. She knows she's losing control. Marcus nodded. It's a dirty play, but it might work. We need a counter-argument, something that proves Grace is the best person for Jamie. Grace swallowed hard. And what if we don't have that? John took her hand, his voice steady. We'll find it. We have to. The morning of the hearing was cold and gray. The courthouse loomed before them, an imposing structure of marble and steel. The reporters gathered near the entrance, cameras flashing as John, Grace, and Jamie arrived. Mr. Hale, is it true that you're going up against your own mother? Miss Bennett, do you think you can win against the Hale family? John shielded Grace and Jamie as they pushed through the chaotic crowd. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers. At the front, Diana Hale sat with her lawyer, her expression serene as if she had already won. John's gaze hardened. Not this time. They took their seats. Jamie clung to Grace's hand, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. John leaned down. It's going to be okay, buddy. Just stay close to your mom. Jamie nodded, his small fingers trembling. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, entered the room. This court is now in session. The proceedings began. Diana's lawyer presented their case with ruthless precision, painting Grace as a struggling single mother unable to provide for Jamie. Fabricated records, twisted facts, and subtle slander piled up like bricks in a wall designed to keep John and Grace out of Jamie's life. Finally, it was John's turn to speak. He stood, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and strong, "I was raised to believe that power and wealth were the only things that mattered, that family was something to be controlled, not cherished. My mother taught me that, and I let her control my life for too long." He turned, meeting Diana's cold gaze. "But family isn't about power. It's about love, trust, and sacrifice. Grace has given Jamie all of that and more. She's fought every day to give him a life filled with kindness and hope. I can't say the same for myself, or for my mother." Diana's eyes narrowed, her mask of composure cracking. John took a deep breath. "Jamie deserves to be with someone who loves him unconditionally. That person is Grace, not me, and not my mother." A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge's sharp eyes softened as she looked at Jamie. "Would you like to say something, young man?" Jamie nodded, his small voice trembling but firm. "I want to stay with my mom. She takes care of me, she loves me, and I love her." Tears streamed down Grace's face. John's vision blurred as he blinked back his own. The judge's gavel struck. "In light of the evidence and testimony, I rule in favor of Grace Bennett retaining full custody of Jamie." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Grace hugged Jamie tightly, sobs of joy and relief shaking her frame. John turned to leave, the weight lifting from his shoulders. He had done the right thing, but a soft hand on his arm stopped him. "John," Grace whispered. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. You don't have to go," she said, her voice trembling. "We're a family, if you want to be." His breath caught. "Are you sure?" She smiled through her tears. "We've lost too much time already. Let's not lose any more." Jamie looked up at him, his eyes hopeful. "Dad, come home with us." John's heart cracked open wide. He knelt, pulling them both into his arms. "I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, the shadow of the past dissolved. All that remained was love, raw, imperfect, and real. For the first time in his life, John Hale knew he was truly home. After the court hearing, John, Grace, and Jamie returned home, their bond stronger than ever. The warmth of their small apartment was filled with laughter as they shared stories and dreams for the future. One evening, as they sat together planning Jamie's next school project, a hesitant knock echoed through the door. John opened it to find Diana standing there, her once imposing presence softened by regret. Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears as she spoke. I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "I let my ambition blind me, and I hurt you all. I'm so sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to try to make things right, if you'll let me." John hesitated, his heart conflicted. But Grace stepped forward, her voice steady. "We can't change the past, but maybe we can start again, for Jamie's sake." Diana nodded, her expression a mix of hope and relief. That evening, they sat together for the first time, sharing a quiet meal as a family. Not perfect, but finally on the path to healing and understanding. No matter how successful one's become, the bonds of family and genuine love are what truly matter. John's journey reminds us that relationships built on trust and care are more fulfilling than any material achievements. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and activate your notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss, and see you in the next story.